Rock and roll promises you can live forever, but for some bands, forever only lasts about 3 minutes. They had a monster hit that everyone knows, then disappeared completely. We found out the shocking reason one band's famous song about a spaceman actually grounded their career for good. 1. Norman Greenbaum. You know that fuzzy, unforgettable guitar riff. The second you hear it, you start tapping your foot. We're talking about the song Spirit in the Sky. It's been in dozens of movies, commercials, and is still played on the radio all the time. The man behind that massive spiritual-sounding hit was Norman Greenbaum. But here's the kicker. His story is not what you think it is. To begin with, Norman wasn't some long-haired rock god. He was a folk singer from Massachusetts who wore cowboy hats. And even stranger, he wasn't religious at all. He just thought a song about religion would be a cool idea. He watched a country singer on TV, got inspired, and wrote the lyrics in just 15 minutes. He created that iconic guitar sound by using a special effects pedal, and a legend was born. The song exploded in 1969. It was a #1 hit all over the world. Norman Greenbaum was suddenly a huge star. Record labels were lining up, expecting him to be the next big thing in rock and roll. But there was a problem. He couldn't do it again. Spirit in the Sky was a perfect, weird, once-in-a-lifetime song. His other music was mostly quiet and folksy. He never had another hit. Truth be told, he didn't really want the rock star life anyway. After the fame faded, he left the music business, moved to a farm, and became a dairy farmer. He just couldn't top that one perfect song. From a song about the heavens, our next band had a hit that was a much darker and heavier journey, an epic jam so massive it defined an era, but doomed the band to obscurity. 2. Iron Butterfly. Let's keep the groovy vibes going, but add a heavy dose of spooky psychedelic rock. In 1968, a band from San Diego called Iron Butterfly unleashed a song so long, so heavy, and so epic, it felt like it was beamed from another dimension. It was a 17-minute monster that defined an entire era of rock music. So, who were these guys? They were a group of young musicians who wanted to push the boundaries of rock and roll. They mixed heavy organ sounds with fuzzy, distorted guitars to create something dark and powerful. They were pioneers of what would later be called heavy metal. They were working on their second album, and they had a song that started as a simple ballad but morphed into something else entirely during a long jam session. Then one day, it happened. They released an edited, shorter version of their epic track, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. The title was supposedly a slurred version of In the Garden of Eden, with its hypnotic organ riff and a drum solo that seemed to last forever. The song was unlike anything on the radio. It became a massive surprise hit. The album sold millions of copies, becoming one of the best-selling albums in history at the time. Iron Butterfly was suddenly one of the biggest bands in the world, playing at huge festivals. But that epic success was impossible to repeat. Lineup changes and disagreements over their musical direction tore the band apart. They were never able to capture that dark, heavy magic again, leaving In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida as their one epic journey into the charts. That band's hit was a dark and heavy epic. But our next artist's hit was a blast of pure theatrical fire, complete with a flaming helmet that made him a star and then burned out his career. 3. The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. All right, let's get theatrical and set the stage on fire, literally. In the late 1960s, a man named Arthur Brown decided rock and roll wasn't just about the music, it was about the show. He was an eccentric and wild performer who painted his face, wore strange robes, and famously wore a metal helmet that he would set on fire during his concerts. He was a true original, a shock rocker before anyone even knew what that was. He wanted to create a performance that was both thrilling and a little bit dangerous. He and his band created a song that was just as fiery and dramatic as his onstage persona. It was a spooky, organ-driven track with a simple, powerful message. You know the one. He screamed to the world, "I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you fire." The song was a massive, unexpected hit all over the world in 1968. With his wild look and even wilder performances, Arthur Brown became an overnight sensation. But here's the problem with a gimmick that big. It's almost impossible to top it. His live shows were so chaotic that they sometimes ended with things actually catching fire, leading to bans and canceled shows. His follow-up music was even stranger and more experimental, and the public just wasn't interested. His one fiery hit burned bright and then quickly went out, leaving him as a forgotten god of hellfire. Arthur Brown's hit was all about fire. Our next band's smash hit was a power ballad that was all about a different kind of passion, but behind the scenes, their story was anything but a love song. 4. Cutting Crew. Let's switch gears to the slick, synth-heavy sound of the mid-'80s. A British band called Cutting Crew, led by singer and songwriter Nick Van Eede, was working hard to get noticed. They had a knack for writing big, emotional rock songs with catchy hooks, perfect for the MTV generation. They were working on their debut album, and they had one song that they knew was special. It was a power ballad with a dramatic intro and a chorus that was absolutely huge. The lyrics were about the end of a romance, but it sounded like the end of the world. The title itself was pure drama. The song was "I Just Died in Your Arms." When it was released in 1987, it was an instant global smash. The cinematic music video was played constantly on MTV, and the song shot to #1 in the United States. Cutting Crew went from a brand new band to one of the biggest acts in the world in a matter of weeks. From the outside, it looked like they were the next big thing. But truth be told, that massive success created a lot of pressure. There was drama and disagreement within the band. They struggled to write a follow-up hit that was as powerful and perfect as their debut. The musical landscape was also changing fast, and their brand of epic power ballad was starting to sound dated. They faded from the charts just as quickly as they had arrived. That band's hit was pure 80s drama. Our next artist's hit was something much goofier, a nursery rhyme turned into a heavy metal song, but a fight with their record label made sure it was their first and last taste of fame. 5. Green Jelly. Let's get weird and head into the bizarre world of the early 90s, where a band that called itself Green Jelly decided to mix comedy, punk rock, and claymation. They called themselves the world's first video-only band and were known for their crazy costumes and puppet shows. They weren't trying to be serious musicians. They were just trying to have fun. They were a comedy act more than a band, making goofy home videos. But one of their songs, a heavy metal retelling of a classic children's story, started to get some attention. It was silly, it was loud, and it was ridiculously catchy. That song was Three Little Pigs. The claymation music video, which featured the pigs fighting back against the big bad wolf, became a surprise hit on MTV. The song actually became a top 20 hit on the Billboard charts. Suddenly, this joke band was a mainstream success. But here's the kicker. Their success was also their downfall. Their record label wanted more silly hits, but the band was a chaotic art project with dozens of members. They got into legal disputes with the label and among themselves. The public quickly moved on from their novelty act, leaving Three Little Pigs as their one and only bizarre trip to the top. Green Jelly was a bizarre novelty act, but our next band was a group of serious rockers whose one big hit was so powerful it became a blue-collar anthem that defined a whole summer, but legal troubles buried their career. 6. Ram Jam. Let's travel back to the gritty, guitar-heavy rock of the 1970s. A band of New York musicians called Ram Jam was formed by a producer who wanted to create a hard-rocking supergroup. They had the talent, they had the look, and they had one song that was an absolute beast. It was a cover of an old folk song about a man named Black Betty. The origins of the song were a mystery, but Ram Jam took it and turned it into a full-throttle rock and roll anthem. It was pure, raw energy. When they released their version of Black Betty in 1977, it exploded. With its driving guitar riff and a beat that sounded like a freight train, the song was a massive hit. It was the perfect song to blast from your car stereo on a summer day. But their success came with a big problem. Civil rights groups called for a boycott of the song, claiming its lyrics were offensive. On top of that, the band got into legal battles with their former bandmates over the song's creation. The controversy and the infighting were too much for a new band to handle. They released a few more songs, but they were completely ignored. The band fell apart, forever known for that one powerful, controversial, and unforgettable rocker. That band's hit was a powerful rocker. Our next band's smash hit was even heavier, a nu metal anthem that became a wrestling theme song, but a sudden tragedy stopped them in their tracks. 7. Drowning Pool. In the early 2000s, rock music got loud, angry, and intense with the rise of nu metal. A band from Dallas, Texas called Drowning Pool was right at the center of this new wave. They were a tight, powerful band with a charismatic and intense lead singer named Dave Williams. They were grinding it out on the road, playing on the massive Ozfest tour, and building a huge buzz. They had one song that was so simple, so aggressive, and so catchy, it was destined to be a hit. That song was Bodies. With its whispered countdown and explosive chorus of "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor," it was the perfect anthem for mosh pits and sporting events. The song was a monster hit on rock radio and was used as the theme for wrestling events, making it a household tune. Drowning Pool was poised to become one of the biggest bands of their generation. They were on top of the world. But then, the dream turned into a terrible nightmare. While on tour, their singer, Dave Williams, passed away unexpectedly from a heart condition. The band was devastated. They lost their friend and their voice. They bravely decided to continue with new singers, but they could never recapture the magic and momentum they had with Dave. The story of Drowning Pool is a truly tragic one, but for our next band, their one big hit was a cheerful, quirky song about not seeing the rain, but the story of their singer is also a truly sad one. 8. Blind Melon. The early 90s were a time of flannel shirts, grunge music, and a general feeling of angst. And then a band called Blind Melon came along with a song that felt completely different. It was a happy, folksy, and incredibly catchy tune that brought a little sunshine back to the radio. The band was a group of talented musicians with a unique, retro vibe. Their lead singer, Shannon Hoon, had a high, powerful voice that was unforgettable. They were trying to make it big, but their first few songs didn't catch on. The record label was about to give up on them. Then they released No Rain. The song itself was great, but what made it a phenomenon was the music video. It featured a little girl in a bee costume, tap dancing her way through a world that didn't understand her, until she finally found a field full of people dressed just like her. The Bee Girl became an icon. The video was played constantly on MTV, and the song shot to the top of the charts. Blind Melon was suddenly one of the biggest bands in the world. They were playing at Woodstock '94 and living the rock star dream. But behind his energetic performances, Shannon Hoon was battling serious personal demons. The pressures of fame were making things worse. Tragically, just 2 years after their big hit, Shannon's journey came to a heartbreaking end. The band tried to continue, but without his unique voice and spirit, it was never the same. Shannon Hoon's story is a tragic one. But our next band's one hit was a protest song so powerful it got them in hot water with governments and helped define a generation. 9. Chumbawamba. Some one-hit wonders are silly pop songs. Others are powerful statements. In 1997, a strange band from England with an even stranger name released a song that nobody could ignore. The band was Chumbawamba, and their song was a drinking anthem with a rebellious secret. For years, Chumbawamba was an underground punk band with strong political beliefs. They were not interested in being famous. They cared about changing the world. They wrote songs about serious issues and lived together in a big shared house. They were the last band you'd ever expect to have a worldwide pop hit. But then they wrote Tub Thumping. You know it by its famous chorus, I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down. The song was so catchy and uplifting, it became a massive global hit. It was played at every sporting event, in every bar, and at every party. The band suddenly had a huge platform, and they used it to talk about their beliefs. They famously got into trouble for their outspoken political views. They were a one-hit wonder by choice. They never tried to write another pop hit because that's not who they were. They took their one shot at fame, delivered their message, and then happily returned to being an underground band. Chumbawamba got up again. But our next artist was a glam rock pioneer whose one big American hit was so cool it inspired countless bands for decades to come, even if he never repeated that success himself. 10. T-Rex. Let's plug in a glittery guitar and travel back to the early 70s, the era of glam rock. And in the world of glam, one of the biggest and brightest stars was a man named Mark Bolan and his band T-Rex. In the United Kingdom, they were absolutely massive. They were as big as the Beatles, with a string of #1 hits, screaming fans, and a fashion sense that was out of this world. Mark Bolan was a true original. He wore makeup, feather boas, and glittery outfits. He was a rock and roll poet with a unique voice and a talent for writing simple, powerful rock songs. In England, he was a certified superstar, but he had one big dream left: to conquer America. He came close with one perfect song. That song was Bang a Gong, Get It On. With its slinky, groovy riff and Bolan's cool, whispered vocals, it was impossible to resist. The song became a top 10 hit in the United States. It was the moment he had been waiting for. It seemed like T-Rex was about to become the biggest band in the world, but for some reason, it never happened. While Bang a Gong was a smash, none of their other songs ever caught on in America. They remained a one-hit wonder in the States, a strange fate for a band that was legendary back home. Tragically, Mark Bolan's life was cut short in a car accident a few years later, leaving Bang a Gong as his one shining moment for American audiences. Mark Bolan was a glam rock pioneer, but our next band came from the sunny skate parks of the 90s, and their one hit was a pop-punk anthem about being your own worst enemy that defined a whole generation of MTV kids. 11th Letter. In the late 90s, as the serious grunge era faded, a new wave of fun, energetic pop-punk took over the radio. And from the sunny suburbs of California came a band called Lit. They were 4 guys who loved catchy hooks, loud guitars, and writing songs about making bad decisions and having a good time. They had been a band for years, working hard, but not getting much attention. They finally got a major label record deal and went into the studio to record an album that they hoped would finally get them noticed. They had one song that perfectly captured their sound and attitude. That song was My Own Worst Enemy. It was an unforgettable anthem about waking up after a wild night and not remembering anything. With its super catchy chorus, it was the perfect party song. The track exploded in 1999, becoming one of the biggest alternative rock hits of the year. The music video was played constantly on MTV. Lit was suddenly on top of the world, playing huge festivals and hearing their song everywhere. But the bottom line is that success was fleeting. Their record label ran into problems, and their next album didn't get the promotion it deserved. They could never write another song that captured that same lightning-in-a-bottle energy, leaving them as the kings of 1999 for just one summer. From a pop-punk party anthem to a smart, witty song from that same 90s alternative scene, our next band's hit was a clever take on being angry. But it was a fight with their record label that ended their career. 12. Harvey Danger. The late 90s were a great time for smart, nerdy rock music, and one of the smartest and nerdiest songs of that era came from a band out of Seattle called Harvey Danger. They were a group of friends who loved wordy lyrics and loud guitars. They were just a local band, playing for fun, when they wrote a song that perfectly captured a feeling of being young, angry, and misunderstood. It was full of clever lines and big sing-along moments. That song was Flagpole Sitta. You probably know it from its famous opening line, "I'm not sick, but I'm not well." The song was a surprise smash hit. It was all over alternative radio and MTV. It was even used in movies and TV shows. The band was suddenly famous, but they were also a little uncomfortable with it. They were indie rock kids at heart, and they didn't like the big corporate music world. They had a huge fight with their record label over their next album. The label didn't promote it, and the band felt betrayed. They were so disgusted with the music business that they broke up. They had one perfect, angry, brilliant hit, and then they walked away from it all. Harvey Danger walked away by choice. But our next artist was a one-man band whose hit was a weird, futuristic song that was so strange it was almost impossible to follow up. 13. Thomas Dolby. Let's get weird and head back to the 80s, the age of synthesizers and strange music videos. In this era, an English musician named Thomas Dolby emerged. He was a true genius, a mad scientist of music who loved to experiment with new sounds and technology. He was a studio wizard, working with other famous bands. But he had his own strange ideas he wanted to explore. He wrote a song that was like a mini-movie, a story about a scientist who is so obsessed with his work that he's blinded himself with science. The song was, of course, "She Blinded Me with Science." With its quirky synth beat and spoken word parts from a famous British scientist, it was one of the weirdest songs to ever become a hit. The music video, which took place in a home for deranged scientists, was equally bizarre and became an MTV classic. The song was a huge hit in America. Thomas Dolby was suddenly a star, known for his crazy hair and his mad scientist persona. But the problem with having a hit that's so unique and so weird is that it's almost impossible to do it again. All of his other music was brilliant and experimental, but none of it was as catchy and strange as his one big hit. He became forever known as the guy who was blinded by science. Dolby's science experiment was a hit. Our next band's smash was a simple, beautiful ballad that became a high school prom theme for years, but their story had a very dark ending. 14. The La's. From the city of Liverpool, England, which gave the world the Beatles, came another band that had the magic. The band was the La's, and they were led by a mysterious and brilliant songwriter named Lee Mavers. He was a total perfectionist, obsessed with finding the perfect sound. The band spent years working on their debut album. Lee Mavers was never happy. He would record songs over and over again, searching for a raw, authentic feel that he could never seem to capture. The record company was getting frustrated. They just wanted to release the album. Finally, they released a song that Lee wasn't even completely happy with. That song was "There She Goes." It was a simple, beautiful, and timeless piece of guitar pop. The song was a hit on both sides of the Atlantic. It's been in countless movies and is still loved by millions. It seemed like the LAs were about to become a huge band. But Lee Mavers' perfectionism took over. He hated the way the album sounded. He disowned his own masterpiece. The band fell apart under the weight of his obsession. They never released another album, leaving "There She Goes" as their one and only perfect, shining moment. The La's perfectionism was their downfall. But our next band's one hit was a raw, powerful song about being an outsider that became an anthem for a generation, but they could never escape its shadow. 15. The Calling. In the early 2000s, a new wave of emotional post-grunge rock was on the radio, and one of the biggest hits of that era came from a band called The Calling. They were led by singer Alex Band, who had a deep, powerful voice that was full of emotion. The band had been working hard for years, trying to get noticed. They finally got their big break when they wrote a song that was both epic and personal. It was a song about feeling lost and wanting to connect with someone wherever they are. That song was Wherever You Will Go. The track was an absolute monster hit. It was the #1 song of the year on the adult pop charts and was played everywhere. The band went from unknowns to superstars. Alex Band's powerful vocals and the song's soaring chorus connected with people all over the world. But that incredible success became a massive shadow that the band could never escape. Their follow-up songs were good, but they just didn't have the same magic as their one huge hit. The pressure to write another Wherever You Will Go was too much, and the band eventually went on a long break, forever defined by that one epic song. That song was a huge global hit for a modern rock band. But for our next act, we have to dial it way back to the 60s for a psychedelic pop hit so catchy, the band who made it actually hated it. 16. The Lemon Pipers. Let's head back to the colorful flower power era of the late 1960s. A group of college kids from Ohio formed a band called the Lemon Pipers. They were serious musicians who loved psychedelic rock and wanted to write long, experimental jam songs. But their record label had other ideas. The label saw their talent but wanted them to make catchy commercial pop songs, a style that was later called bubblegum pop. The band wasn't happy about it, but they agreed to record a song written for them by professional songwriters. That song was Green Tambourine. It was a quirky, catchy, psychedelic pop gem that shot to #1 on the charts in 1968. The Lemon Pipers were suddenly huge stars. But they hated the music they were famous for. They wanted to be a serious rock band, not a pop act. In a rebellious move, their album included both the catchy pop hit and their long, weird psychedelic jams. The public was confused, and the band felt like they had sold out. They broke up soon after, forever frustrated that their one taste of fame came from a song they never wanted to record. That band was forced to be something they weren't. But our next band was everything they appeared to be, a full-blown 80s hair metal machine whose one hit was an invitation to the biggest party on MTV. 17th Autograph. Let's plug in and head to the mid-80s, the golden age of hair metal and MTV. A band from Los Angeles called Autograph had everything they needed to be stars: big hair, flashy clothes, and a sound that was perfect for arenas. They were good friends with the guys from Van Halen who helped them get their big break. They were working on their debut album and knew they needed a huge, catchy anthem that would get everyone's attention. They wrote a song that was pure 80s fun, with a chorus that was perfect for shouting along to with your fist in the air. That song was Turn Up the Radio. It was the ultimate party anthem. The music video, featuring the band flying around in a futuristic guitar-shaped spaceship, was pure 80s cheese and was played constantly on MTV. The song was a huge hit, and Autograph was suddenly opening for some of the biggest bands in the world. But here's the kicker: that one perfect party song was all they had. They were never able to write another song that was as catchy or as fun. As the 80s came to an end and the music scene changed, they were quickly forgotten, leaving Turn Up the Radio as their one and only invitation to the big rock and roll party. That band's party ended quickly. But our next band's single hit was also a party song, just with a totally different look. Forget the hairspray and leather. This band wore scruffy overalls and played the fiddle. 18. Dexy's Midnight Runners. Let's jump back to the 80s. A group of musicians from England called Dexys Midnight Runners had a very specific vision. They wanted to create a new kind of soul music, and they had a very specific look to go with it: overalls, bandanas, and a scruffy working-class style. They had some success in the UK, but they were still looking for that one song that would break them worldwide. They wrote a song with a Celtic fiddle intro and a chorus that was impossible not to sing along to. That song was Come On Eileen. In 1982, you couldn't escape it. The music video featuring the band dancing around in their signature overalls was on a constant loop on MTV. The song went to #1 all over the world, including the United States. They were a massive, if slightly strange, sensation. But the band, and especially their leader Kevin Rowland, had a reputation for being very difficult to work with. They fought with their record label and the press. Their unique vision was so strong that they refused to compromise, which made it hard for them to stay in the mainstream pop world. They never had another hit in America, leaving Come On Eileen as their one glorious overall-wearing moment in the sun. Eileen was a party, but our next band's one hit was a spooky psychedelic classic from the 60s that defined the summer of love, but the band itself remains one of rock's biggest mysteries. 19. Blues Magoos. The 1960s were a time of wild musical experimentation, and one of the wildest bands to come out of the garage rock scene was the Blues Magoos. They were from the Bronx, New York, and they were known for their fuzzy guitars, psychedelic sounds, and light-up suits they wore on stage. They were a hard-working local band when they recorded a song that was pure, rebellious energy. It was a simple two-chord rocker with a sneering vocal and a killer organ solo. The song was We Ain't Got Nothin' Yet. It was a blast of pure teenage attitude that shot up the charts in 1967. For a brief moment, the Blues Magoos were stars. They appeared on TV shows and were seen as one of the coolest new bands of the psychedelic era. But their success was short-lived. They tried to follow up their hit with more experimental and strange music, but the public didn't follow. The band went through lineup changes and creative disagreements. They were a flash of psychedelic light that burned out almost as soon as it appeared, leaving behind one perfect, fuzzy garage rock anthem.